All right. Beware of the Ides of March. Anybody who remembers that from high school,
Yeah.
reading Julius Caesar, William Shakespeare, uh, knows what the Ides of March is. March 15, 2024. Common Sense coming at you on the Ides of March, brought to you by Harper Plus Accounting. Another, maybe it is sort of foreboding the Ides of March because it is also corporate tax deadline. So for those who started a new entity in 2023 and you're thinking, yeah, I'll get to that one of these days. Well, today's the day you're supposed to file something, anything, at least an extension, if you would please. And if you owe money, pay that. And then you won't get penalized, taxed, and otherwise drawn and quartered and dragged throughout the country or the city. If you need help with that, Harper Plus CPA can do it. Now, I would have to think that if you called them today, you might be a little bit late. But
maybe I don't know. They probably have a little trick up their sleeve to help you. Maybe
they'll get a quick extension
Sure,
for you and let you at least kick the can down the road.
Yeah.
But it caused me. I remember as a young lad reading Julius Caesar, William Shakespeare in high school. They probably don't teach that anymore, do they, Norm?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Because
not woke enough.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, there's no DEI in Shakespeare.
I don't think there were any females in the Roman Senate, so it was not diverse.
Right, but if you Googled it with AI, they would all be black women. Right.
Yeah,
I think Adobe had the same problem as Google. I saw, but anyway, the Ides of March. I did some quick Google research, and that's accurate. But the Roman calendar was based on the moon cycles, and I guess it was always a full moon sometime between the 13th and the 15th of the month. So that was always considered the Ides of the month. And the Ides of March now has this foreboding prophecy to it. I think maybe in large part because of the Shakespeare play, but I think also it's now known as the day that Julius Caesar was actually killed. Et tu, Norman. Et tu, Brutus.
Et tu, Brutus. Yes.
Yeah. Then falls Caesar.
Yeah.
But anyway, we've got a lot to talk about here today. But first, maybe as a segue, the World War II fact of the day, and I'm not going to go deep into this fact because it's going to give us a jumping off point for some other stuff that's going on. In 1935, Goebbels, working for the Nazis, banned 4 or 5, I think, let me double check that, banned, I think, 5 or 4 newspapers in Nazi Germany. And, it's sort of, I read that as I prepare for these things. I always do a little quick history lesson in the morning. And I read that, and I was going to dig into what newspapers and do a little bit more fact checking. But instead, I sort of thought, well, that's interesting because the Nazis were in charge. The government was banning newspapers. And there are 2 world stories, one in the United States, one in Canada, that I thought sort of paralleled this. And, the one in the United States is we had a House vote to basically ban TikTok. In the United States, at least as long as it's owned by the Chinese corporate entity that owns it. And, there's good reason behind that we can go into, I suppose. And it has to do with the stated Chinese policy. I mean, it's been exposed now. Their policy is to influence our citizenship and not win the conventional war, but rather the ideological war and sort of dismantle our country from within using that kind of, using TikTok as a platform to get to our youth and others. And, to some extent, it clearly has worked. On the other hand, you've got a bigger picture issue that you've got the government actually stepping in and banning a media source. Now, you could say it's only social media and it's not really a newspaper, but, it is still a media source where businesses disseminate information about their businesses. And I know a lot of maybe some, I don't want to call them, like less conventional news sources like ours, for instance, might put information out on TikTok and make it available to people. So it casts a pretty big dragnet to say it's gone unless it's owned by somebody else. And I was listening to Rand Paul, Norm, talk about this, and I don't think he voted for it or said he wouldn't vote for it. And he's concerned because of the exercise of government power to actually do this. So what I always try to do is separate. All right, what are we trying to do? We're trying to ban a bad. Look, China is our mortal enemy. I don't care what anybody says, they are. So it's a great idea, I think, to limit their influence over our country. On the other hand, it's an exercise of government power in the realm of maybe not quite exactly what Goebbels was doing in Nazi Germany, but we're eliminating through the flex of a government muscle, perhaps completely eliminating a media news source, social media source. And then, Rand Paul went into some other stuff talking about what if you're a shareholder and what does that do to the value of your shares? He talked about a unconstitutional taking under the Fifth Amendment. He talked about potential First Amendment implications, although I think that might be a little more of a stretch. So there's always bigger things underlying these kind of actions by government. And the first question I always ask, maybe because I just generally distrust the government, is what exercise of government power is at play here, and how is it going to be used later if in a similar situation in a way that we don't like? That's not to say I like TikTok. I think, look, if it's true what's going on with China, and I think that it is, then clearly there's a big problem. But
well, and I think it's a bit hypocritical. So I took a look at the 15 Ohio U.S. representatives that voted yay or nay. One voted nay, the other 14 yay. So I wonder how many of those representatives are on TikTok.
Well, that's right.
5 of the 15 are on TikTok, including Mike Carey and Jim Jordan.
Yeah.
Thinking, so if it's that bad, why are you on it?
Well, that's right. So,
it's time to get off.
I could think of several valid reasons.
Yeah.
So,
it's like saying, I'm sorry, go ahead. No,
why buy a Russian or a Chinese made AK for your shooting? Or their ammunition. I mean, there's a lot of things you can buy or subscribe to from your enemy to use against them potentially.
Yeah.
I could see subscribing to TikTok just so I could understand what TikTok is. How else are you going to understand what it is unless you get on it and play in it? So I don't know.
Well, I think it's deeper than that. I think they're actually not just doing it for reasons of maybe it's like saying, why would a federal agent go to a party where there's a bunch of criminals? I mean, yeah, you're going to go to investigate, but I think there's more than that. I think these people are actually using TikTok to their advantage. They're using it for the platform.
I don't know.
They're using the platform.
I don't know. I don't know, Steve. You could be right. It could be staff subscribe them to TikTok. Who the hell knows? I don't know.
Well, look, I gave a news interview in my real life upstairs in the law firm not too long ago. Up in it was about a woman who was arrested up in northern Ohio somewhere. She had like 300 warrants or something, or 300 counts against her out of Pennsylvania, and it was an extradition. And I gave some sort of commentary on that, and I do that periodically. And somebody from Portsmouth, Ohio, texted me and said, "I saw you on TikTok." And I thought, well, what the hell am I doing on TikTok? I don't even have TikTok. And my news interview was disseminated on TikTok. So people are using it as a source to disseminate their news. And that was the point I was making at the beginning. It's like there are valid news outlets, and maybe news outlets with which I would disagree inherently on their political bent, but there are news outlets that use it on both sides, probably of the political aisle. And
they did not vote to ban TikTok. So I don't see any kind of contradiction between somebody using TikTok to reach young voters, perhaps. I don't know the reasons why.
Well, I guess I thought the vote was to ban it unless they sell it.
No, the vote was to a divestment vote.
Yeah, well, that's the same. So what's
it's not the same.
Let's at least outline what they said.
Yeah.
So TikTok by X date has to be not owned by the Chinese corporation that currently owns it. So the ownership structure has to change by X date, or it is banned. Exactly. And the question is, on the libertarian side of the fence would be, well, what's that do to the stock value? How does that change the value of my shares if I own it individually? Are we really taking somebody's property away? What happens if they don't get a valid buyer and the company sort of dissolves? Then what? I mean, there's always implications to this, and I'm not suggesting that I disagree with the argument against TikTok. I'm just saying there's always more to talk about.
Right.
The federal government heavily regulates the news business in the United States now. Have you heard of the FCC? Okay. TV and radio are licensed by the federal government. Okay. And they have very specific criteria about how many stations you can own, in what market, who can own it, what kind of public service ads you have to run. They even for a while had what was called I think the fair use, not the fair use. It was like it was some kind of doctrine that if you had 20 minutes of a liberal or a Democrat, you had to have 20 minutes of a conservative or a Republican. Sure. You had to balance it.
But
there's that out.
There's a reason behind that, though, Norman. It's a little bit different. See,
sure
we've covered this because, look,
yes.
At the time the FCC promulgated all those regulations about fair use and how many frequency, all that stuff, it was premised in large part on the fact that there was a limited number, or there are a limited number of frequencies available. So they didn't want one person, one entity, one side of an argument controlling all of it. So they had to sort of say, all right, we have to break this up and make sure it's divested a little bit. And now, when we talked about this with
but Steve,
one of our experts,
interject briefly and then go back. Hold your thought. But they went way past, frequency assignment and frequency levels.
Sure,
like
they
how
did.
many,
right? They did.
How many watts you put? They went way past that into content.
Yes,
that's my point.
And but your point is the one that I'll get to my other. Let me finish my first thought, and that is, just because the U.S. Supreme Court permitted it, and the U.S. Supreme Court did permit that type of regulation because of the argument I'm making. They're saying, look, it wasn't necessarily content-based power grab. It was more based on, look, there's limited things here. There's limited frequencies. There's limited availability. So we have to make sure it's not monopolized. All right. So that's why the U.S. Supreme Court permitted that. And we've talked about this, and we've wondered going forward on platforms like what we're doing here. This is unlimited. The internet is basically ubiquitous. There's how many podcasts, how many, they just keep coming and coming and coming. There's not a reason for the federal government to jump into this realm, and TikTok sort of falls in.
They have.
And I agree. And TikTok falls into this.
And yet they have. We know for sure. So some of this is hyperventilation, in my opinion. When we have a mortal enemy, the Chinese Communist Party, which owns ByteDance. ByteDance is the parent company of TikTok. ByteDance has an AI project which is run by the Chinese military intelligence arm.
Yes.
So we know that this is a military aggressive operation to change Americans, the way they think about our history, the way they think about government, the way they think about each other.
Yep.
It is trying to start a race war.
Yes.
It is trying to gin up jealousy between people who are of different economic means.
Well,
look, and so divestment to me makes total sense. I don't view this as Elon Musk views it as a Trojan horse on the First Amendment. And I understand our Constitution talks about persons have rights, not citizens. I understand that, and I understand the debate there. This is a corporation owned by a foreign adversary. I just don't see the problem.
Well, you have to see the problem, because it's going to when the government exercises power like this, it's not the current instance that we typically are concerned about, because it makes sense, right? We don't want a foreign adversary or a nation that is hostile to ours controlling thought within our country. And anybody who looks back at World War II, to take it back there, we talked about who was the Japanese radio
Tokyo Rose.
Yeah, Tokyo Rose. Right. It's like we would have, of course, said no, Japan's not allowed to have any airwaves in the United States, and it would all make sense. But then when the war is over, when the dust is settled, when then the situation has changed, now we have the existence of a government power grab. And how's it going to be looked at? Is it an isolated incident where we can carve out a very unique exception? Is it something that's going to be repeated? Is it something that's going to be expanded upon? And look, you've already done it, Norm. You've committed the fallacy that I hate. Well, we already have restrictions, so this one's just another restriction. Well, the fact that we already have restrictions doesn't make this one right. It makes
that's my point. My point was not that just because we do it in this area, it's okay in that area. My point was that all of the horror and shock about regulating free speech, we do it all the time.
Well, right, but it doesn't make it right to do it here. And I'm saying we should do less of it across the board.
So we have 535 elected people directly elected by the people in a democratic fashion. No, no electoral college. When we vote for, say, Jim Jordan, it's one person, one vote. 535 people will decide this issue, and they represent the people of the United States.
Well, I think 9 people will decide this issue ultimately.
What's that again?
I think 9 people will ultimately decide this issue.
Well, they're equal branches, so.
Yeah. Well, I mean, but look, I agree with you. Look, the Congress, at least they're doing it by in open forum and debate. At least they're saying, look, here's why we're doing this. Here's the basis of it. We have a legislative General Assembly discussion about it. We're going to pass a law.
Yeah.
And then guess what? We still get judicial review. The courts get to look at this and say, look, this implicates the Constitution in ways that we're worried about. How are we going to, in the U.S. Supreme Court, eventually is going to have to navigate the waters of either limiting this exercise of power to its facts in some way, shape, or form, or carving out a legal exception that can be applied consistently in the future without eroding away more rights or without becoming a taking. I'm just saying, it sounds awesome to ban TikTok, and on the face of it, I agree. I think I'm dead against TikTok for all the reasons we've talked about. China's in control of it. China's got a very direct, and this isn't speculation, by the way. There are authors out there, there are investigative journalists out there who have exposed this. I mean, we've got the documents that basically prove China's agenda here. You have to sort of take it as fact. And, so I agree with getting that, eliminating that stuff. But this is the problem with a free society. To steal from Marx, which I would rarely do, a capitalistic society, or perhaps you could insert a free society, has this, it has its own seeds, or it has the seeds of its own destruction, because we permit free speech in our country. And that means that people who come in with speech that is contrary to our very being get to have free speech. And when it starts to take root, like it has, then you have to worry. And then the question is, all right, so how do we overcome that? Is it by banning it? Is it by exposing it? Is it by doing more of it? I don't know. But these are the sort of the bigger picture philosophical debates that need to happen.
It's by changing who owns it. That's all.
Well, you can change who owns it, and that may not change the problem.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Right. So then it's a meaningless regulation.
There are American citizens that own, Huffington Post, the Washington Post, the New York Times. There are American journalists who are trying to undermine our society too, traditional society.
Sure.
And they're
like every single former newspaper in the country.
Yeah. I would like to ask this question of the TikTok horrified people. Where were they? Where was their concern about suppressed, oppressed government action against free speech by people who wanted to talk about COVID, by people who wanted to talk about various conservative issues, and the not that COVID is a conservative issue, but a whole range of discussion was suppressed by the federal government on other platforms like pre-X Twitter, okay, back when Jack Dorsey owned that corporation before Musk.
Yeah,
I didn't hear anybody on TikTok giving a good goddamn about my rights.
Hold on a second, though. Platforms. Some of the people who are going to be up in arms about the TikTok problem are the local business owners who use TikTok to advertise their business. And,
what will stop them if a different owner? So Steve Mnuchin,
nothing except this.
Nothing. Zero.
Except for this. Nothing except for this. One, we are presuming that ownership actually does change hands. And I think it probably will, but that still has to happen. Two, that the reach and scope of TikTok maintain the way they are, because immediately, as soon as the content that the kids like is removed or not being created or not being influenced, it's likely that the scope of the TikTok influence will diminish. And they've spent dollars and they've spent resources to sort of target their marketing using TikTok. So,
we haven't addressed the vetting of that new company.
Well, that's right.
We still have the sophisticated manipulation of AI. No matter who owns the company, that's going to follow. Unless we vet the company. And are we in the vetting business, the government vetting business?
Well, that's right. So who can own a private company? It's a dicey equation.
And again, I agree. It needs to change. I think that can help, but it's one of those, okay,
so
we know the evil we have now. Is it a greater evil if it's so? I don't know.
It almost is like a declaration of war and therefore giving some sort of emergency grant of authority to do something like this. Look, I don't profess to have the answers, but I love exposing all the issues. Well, that's what being a law student is all about. You learn how to spot the issues. Yeah. And, the issues here are deeper than just getting rid of China. And, and Norm, where were all those people? Well, look, I mean, you yourself ran into this when you protested a bit about Johnstown and Intel coming in and all the taking of the land there. It's like people don't tend to get off their backsides until it's in their backyard. And that's just what the United States has always been about. Look at, we barely decided to fight the Revolutionary War. We barely decided to fight the War of 1812. We barely decided to get involved in World War I and World War II. It's like we don't get involved, it seems, as a people, or even give a rat's ass until it's in our backyard. And then it's like
the 11th hour.
Almost. Like, wait a minute.
Yeah, no.
You Brits are putting soldiers in my barn and taking over my bedroom. No, now we got a problem, dude.
Yeah.
Or you burned the White House in after the war was over, you come in and you burn Washington. Well, guess what? F you. Now we're at war.
Yeah.
So I think that's human nature, and I don't expect. I think people operate on their own economic interest, and then when that sort of coincides with the ideology, they start to realize the light bulb comes on, and then they're out there. So,
none of this has anything to do with free speech, as far as I'm concerned. I am in favor of Chinese divestment of their agricultural facilities, their factories, every damn thing that the Chinese Communist Party has an investment in this country. Throw their ass out. They're about to attack.
Yeah, but how did we allow it in the first place, though?
Well,
was it under the radar?
Money. Here's how it happened, because it's not just the Chinese owned stuff. These are corporations that Americans are a part of, and by and large, a lot of people in the American deep state governmental structure are part of these things. So people have made a lot of money.
I would call those people traitors.
Well, could be.
Yeah.
On both sides of the aisle. On both sides of the aisle.
What is the difference between Hunter Biden and Joe taking a bribe to help the Chinese communists? Where I'm against that. What is the difference between that and a businessman doing the same thing for his own profiteering? He is selling his country up the creek.
There's a huge difference, because Hunter Biden was involved for influence peddling because his dad was was vice president and had influence. I mean, that's different than just making money privately.
Well, I think making money privately at the expense of your country is being a traitor.
Well, and
that's a definition of it.
I'm not necessarily disagreeing with you, but it isn't against the law as it stands to own stock in a company that is Chinese owned. As far as I know, I don't know. I'm guessing it's not. So now or let's say it's not, and there are Americans.
Well, I'm not talking about innocent shareholders that just buy an investment.
Well, I am, because if you divest those companies of their assets, then those innocent shareholders are losing their money.
Yeah, and that's a risk they took because they knew what they were buying into. They're buying into an enemy country's corporation. So that would be like me buying stock in Porsche in 1938. Okay, pretty risky move, wasn't it?
Well, risky how?
Well, because Germany started a war the next year.
All right. Well, that's different than your own country saying we're going to eliminate this company altogether. And therefore, the money that
that's not what they're doing. But I know you keep going back to that, but that's not what the legislation was. It was divestment.
All right. Well, we're going to divest this company of its money-making assets. Therefore, your stock price is going from 100 to 0, and now you've lost money.
So why was it okay to force divestment of U.S. investors in companies in South Africa? Why was that okay?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't profess to have these answers, Norm. But I mean, it's the same type of issue.
Yeah.
Because we did that. We forced universities, trust funds, these big, huge investment funds that people.
I would right to get out of a part. I get you. Now I would want to know.
Okay, why was that, just?
I would want to know what the decisions were, what the court decisions were with respect to the Fifth Amendment taking clause. And I don't know why it was just. I'm sure it was litigated, and I'd like to read the reasoning. I'm grossly unprepared for this debate, but all I'm doing is identifying the issue. We have a government that is essentially, there's a good argument the government is taking assets from its citizens, not just Chinese corporations, but to the extent citizens have an interest in these companies. That's an issue that needs to be addressed. And maybe it's a balancing test, maybe it's not. I'm sure the courts have come up with some way to rationalize around it being a taking back in the apartheid days, and I'm sure they'll use some sort of similar rationale now. But all I'm doing, Norm, is pointing out the other side of the equation, that there's more to think about here, and you can't just simply ban stuff and say the government has the power to do it. You have to have an enabling clause that gives the government the power to do it.
Yeah. Okay. Well, my reactions are not knee jerk, number one, and they're not made lightly, number two. So, I think people that invested in an enemy country, or let's at least say an adversary country's corporations, they knew the risk, or they should have known the risk, and I'm playing my violin for them.
Well, and that makes sense. I mean, they willingly knew that they put money into China, so
Exactly.
there are risks into any situation like that, for sure. I mean, well, Apple did the same thing. They invested huge in China workers, and now they're actually Apple's paying the price because that relationship is flipped.
That's right.
Apple really can't leave China now. Yeah. China wanted it, and they were giving, kind of bending over backwards. Now China's saying, now, right, we basically know what you're doing here. We can, they flip the table on them. So, but Apple rolled the dice on that one, and they're stuck. They're stuck. Right. They have to stay there. Yeah.
I'll give you another from my professional point of view. I'll give you another example. I know many manufacturers that had Chinese corporations make various kinds of parts, automotive parts, right? And they sent them the design, they sent them the CAD files, they sent them the molds, whatever they needed to send them. And of course, they got their products made. And then they look on eBay, and guess what? They just stole the intellectual property, and they are selling the same exact item using the intellectual property that was, sent to them. These people took a stupid risk. And now the same wheel that they want to charge $150 for in America, you could buy on eBay for $75.
Yeah, but there's no government action in that risk. The federal government has done nothing.
No, well, there's no government action in me buying stock in TikTok.
But there's government action in the federal government doing things to devalue that stock.
Right, but you were talking about how this is a terrible consequence for investors. And
I never said terrible consequence. I just said what you have is a different consideration, that investors' stock prices, if to the extent they've invested in it, to the extent they own stock in it, or maybe they own a mutual fund that has stock in it and they don't even know they have stock in it.
That's right.
This impacts the market.
That's right.
And you could say, I suppose, well, they should have known that this fund was investing in a Chinese-owned fund, and then they should have predicted that the U.S. government was going to step in and ban it at some point in the future. But the fact is, that's not necessarily a defense to the U.S. government taking clause.
Yeah.
Well, because these mutual funds are operating like BlackRock does, operating under a DEI mentality, they were picking and choosing stocks for reasons other than maximizing your portfolio already.
Sure.
So,
and some action groups have shed light on that. So now at least investors have some understanding. But Joe Blow in his 401k, where he's selecting this growth fund, he's not going to have any idea where that money's going as a practical matter.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what every single company my funds are in my 401k are buying and selling. I don't dig into that. I suppose I could. I suppose I could.
And who ultimately, whose responsibility is that? It is yours.
Well, it's mine, but
your
the fund manager has a fiduciary duty to me as well.
Yes, he does.
But it's contractual. What is not my responsibility is when the federal government does something to step in and say, all right, we're no longer going to permit this corporation to own this asset. And therefore, as a result of that, the price of their stock is going to plummet. Perhaps.
Steve, that happens all the time. If I'm a shareholder in Exxon and they decide not to build the pipeline through Canada, didn't the federal government just shit all over my portfolio? This happens all the time.
Yeah, it didn't divest the ownership of the company, though.
No, but if your point is the federal government took action to hurt private treasure, that happens every day, every hour, every minute. So I don't know.
All I'm saying is somewhere in there, the taking clause is going to have to be addressed, and I will predict, like you predict, Norm, and I'm not predicting it gets reversed. I'm not even predicting that the U.S. government is going to be found not to have this authority, but that is the issue. That's the issue that they've got to get around with this with this exercise of power.
And it's going to go to SCOTUS.
I think it's going to go to the courts.
Yeah.
Got to.
Wow. Yeah.
It's got to.
Yeah. Wow.
But I like that it's happening the way it's happening. I mean, it's not just some executive order coming from the Oval Office.
True.
You know, at least the Congress is doing what it's supposed to do. It's creating and writing laws and passing them. Well, not completely yet, but Biden has said he'll sign it, and I think it passes the Senate too.
Biden's not going to sign it. I'll bet it doesn't pass the Senate.
I'll bet you if
it's going to have a rougher road from what I'm hearing.
It's going to have a rougher road for the reasons we're talking about.
Yeah.
But I think Biden has already said he would sign it. Now, interestingly, Trump is sort of on the other side of this, saying, "Nah, not so fast."
Yeah.
And now they're and like anything in politics, follow the money. Always follow the money.
Yeah.
Like, and I think Biden may see this as a political jostling or a political maneuver to sort of get around Trump on this, to say, see, I banned TikTok, and Trump still does business with China.
And really, if I heard all of Trump's reaction to it, is just all he was saying is, well, it gives Facebook more power because everybody will go to Facebook. It's like, well, okay, that's a reason, but
something will emerge.
He didn't go deep as we just did.
Yeah, no.
I mean, come on.
Something will emerge in its place, and it always will. But anyway, it's like, well, it's sort of. Anyway, we don't need to dig into it. So, all right, enough of that. We beat that horse to death.
My. What you got on your list, Norm?
Well, I think it's pretty interesting that we've had George on our show a couple times, former OSU wrestler, and just in the news this week. I don't know if he was a teammate in the same period of time, but approximately he might have been. This Mike Coleman, a former UFC fighter who had won in 1988, had won a national championship for Ohio State in wrestling, NC2A wrestling. He almost died saving his parents in a house fire this past week, and was able to successfully get them out of a burning house. And he's in the hospital recovering, and I guess inhaled, fumes and was burned. And, truly a hero to go back. His dog woke him up, heard his dog barking, wakes up, the house is on fire, and he runs out to see if his parents had escaped and runs back into a burning house. And kudos to Mike Coleman. Not the former mayor of Columbus, by the way, but a former wrestler.
Mark Coleman. Mark Coleman.
Is it Mark Coleman?
Is it Mark?
I think it's Mark. Yeah.
Oh, Mark Coleman.
Okay.
Excuse me.
Yeah. No. Well, we didn't know either. Our producer just yelled Mark, so we were right in line with you until then. So yeah.
Very good. So next time we have George on, we'll have to ask if he knows Mark.
Yeah.
So along those lines of disasters and things, I don't think this was on the list of things I was planning on talking about, because I didn't know until last night that we were going to have a bunch of tornadoes touch down. So did anybody see that up in Lakeview, Ohio? There's some interesting history here too. It's like Ohio's used to have a canal system, and the canals were fueled, funneled, supplied by things like fed. Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. By Indian Lake, and there's another one on the east side of Columbus called Buckeye Lake.
Canal Winchester.
Right. And One of those has become several become recreational lakes. One is Indian Lake, which is up a little bit northwest of Ohio, and then Buckeye Lake, which is sort of due east. But there's a small town up there called Lakeview, and it was there were at least 3 people killed, I guess, last night in tornadoes that touched down. And then they also ripped through there's like a camper park there where people go and they have their summer homes or maybe some permanent homes, and that basically was decimated. Lots of people struggling up there. So we shall see how that all shakes out. But dangerously close to home, we have tornadoes. And I was watching the news last night, and it was sort of fascinating. The news, I hardly ever watch local news, but I was watching because I knew that was happening. This guy, I don't even know his name, but he was like a kid in a candy store talking about tornadoes, man. I mean, he was like, now look at this. Now here's what's happening. It's like little water droplets braising. I mean, I mean this as a compliment.
Those systems are amazing.
It is
in the work of
scientifically incredible. How that happened.
Have you seen one? Have you guys ever seen one?
Not in person.
No.
So years ago, when Xenia was devastated, Xenia, Ohio was devastated by a massive, in fact, I think it was 2 tornadoes and went through. One was particularly destructive. That day, when the tornado system crossed the Ohio River, it literally, like Moses, it literally sucked the water out to the bed of the Ohio River. When it crossed from Kentucky to Ohio, it came over the hill where Mount St. Joseph College is located. And so I saw it in person as a teenager. The feeling of utter helplessness when you see that thing and know that it could come your way or it could go away the other way. It can do whatever it wants to do. And basically, you're done. Like if it comes for you. There's no way to stop it. And and I guess in the presence of it physically being in the context of a tornado or seeing one, it grounds you about the power of nature and our relatively impotent status when it comes to what Mother Nature wants to do. She's going to do it.
Yeah. And you know, we prayers to these folks who have lost their lives, lost their homes, the families who are trying to piece everything back together. I just looked at some pictures and it is catastrophic. I mean, it looks like a movie. It looks like a movie scene.
Yeah.
So Lakeview, Steve, is the town next to Indian Lake.
Yeah. Yeah. It's up there near. So the bigger towns around that area would be Bell Fountain. Marysville's a little bit southeast. And then you're heading up towards Auglaize County. It's sort of right in between.
Right.
But
yeah, I think the system stretched from Texas up to here. There's hundreds. It was crazy. Hundreds of tornado watches.
There were tornadoes about 40 miles north of Dallas that we heard of last night. So
yeah. I mean, crazy.
We didn't hear the tornado. We heard of them. You know,
and you know what's interesting? The phenomenon, and I've even experienced this. Like when you hear tornado warning and you hear the big sirens and you see the guys on TV talking about it, it's really hard to take it seriously. I mean, I hate to say it, but it really is. It's like, oh, it's not going to hit me. And it's to your point, Norm. It's like when it does, you realize how powerful it really is and how helpless you really are. It's like, you know, do you always go take cover every time you hear a tornado siren? I think people rarely do. And you could hear it in the newscaster's voice last night. I am telling everybody, get to a safe place. He was telling people to put on bike helmets. I mean, he was like, this is dangerous and this is coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we were at the Dallas Lowe's, one of the Lowe's hardware stores last night. I'm sure other stores have these. For $4,000, they have this welded, it's almost like a section of a submarine. It's a circular barrel thing that bolts to the floor of your basement or your garage with a hatch. And you literally, you and your immediate family, there's just enough room to scooch in, get in this
metal igloo almost. Yeah, right.
Yeah, it is all welded up and, you know, thick gauge, and there's no windows. I guess maybe you light a candle inside. I don't know what you do, but it's $4,000 and it literally looks like something the Navy would, you know, put to sea or something, and it's gigantic. And I guess people in Tornado Alley, like Oklahoma or Kansas or Texas, I guess maybe they, well, if it's at Lowe's, apparently people buy them.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's probably one of those things you consider when you're building a home or remodeling your home. Let's put in a tornado shelter.
Yeah,
like a safe room.
Right.
Yeah.
If you didn't have the basement built and such, if you're on a cement slab, you're screwed. I mean, yeah. Other than find the best corner you can hide in, which, again, how much protection that is, I don't know.
Or if you're in a camper or a trailer, oh my gosh.
Oh my gosh,
you're just, what do you do?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I mean, you're just toast.
Yeah. Well, I had thrown this idea at you guys. We're coming up on Tuesday, which is presidential primary for Ohio and some other states. But by the time it's reaching us, there's no decision. Trump and Biden are the
consequences of this are insignificant,
right? Yeah,
from an Ohio standpoint,
right? On the presidential level, of course, we have other races that are important that need to go vote and such. But I guess the thought came to mind, and I threw this at a few people, and I did some research on it as well too. Is like, why doesn't the U.S. have it just one day? Yeah, and what are the pros and cons to that? I'm not saying it should be good,
and I couldn't come up with a reason why.
Yeah,
other than maybe logistics when it all started.
Maybe so I dug a little bit into it just to know, okay, where did it come from? Why do we have primaries? And it's actually a fairly recent event. We've not been doing it that long. So it's not a constitutional piece. The states control it. They make their own rules and primaries are run. Nothing federal about it. So
we're in contract basically with the different parties.
Yes. Several states have worked together to get the primaries on the same date. As we know, New Hampshire has said that they will always be first, though. Whatever date, they're going to be first, no matter what. So, but yeah, it's evolved over time. But apparently, from what I'm seeing, it really kind of kicked in 1968. Neither party held primaries in a majority of states, but in 1976, it's a 50-state deal. So it's really recent in our time. Now, from what I'm gathering, the people that are saying this is a good thing, they're saying, okay, so maybe there's 17, 18 people vying for the nomination. When you have that many candidates on the ballot, the winner might only have been chosen by 10% of the people, with the remaining 90% of the vote divided among 16 other candidates. Okay. They're saying the longevity of this vets people out. You get to see their cracks. They jump down, they get out of the race and such.
It's a longer campaign trail, but it would just move the clock back on the campaign trail. Like people would just still campaign all around. I don't know.
I don't know. I mean,
part of me is with you. I think just do it all in one day. I would think the technology that we have today to conduct an election.
Some of it was that they could do the coffee houses. They meet people, in the smaller states. That's what was going on. Yeah. But I think the internet and social media and podcasting has changed that drastically. I don't know. I don't think there's an answer. A lot of people have been talking about putting it on one day. This is the earliest that this has been decided in history of primaries. Is this year has been the earliest,
and it was almost a blowout from Jump Street.
Pretty much, and it still comes down to money. Who's got the biggest money? That or the most money with it. So I don't know if there's an answer. I just kind of wanted to throw it out there, going, why don't we? You feel kind of neutered.
Yeah.
When it comes to us, like, okay, great. So we go to the polls on Tuesday. Presidential things. We never had a shot at, if you're a Democrat, to vote. To raise your hand going, you know what, I don't like you, Biden, I'm going to vote for the guy that is on the ticket, and kind of make your voice known there. Or if you're, Republican, you don't have an opportunity to go to the polls and say, I'm going to vote for Nikki because Trump, I really don't like what you're doing. This is my voice to tell you I don't like what you're doing.
We didn't have a chance to vote for DeSantis.
Or that, whoever's on the ticket. Exactly. So, exactly.
And
good or bad. I don't know I don't know what the answer is. I don't know. I think it's something that should be talked about.
Norm, where do you stand on it?
I don't know.
Well, you guys think back in previous presidential elections during the primaries, there's a certain phenomenon that happens in that first handful of states where a lot of times, I would say at least half of the time, the person who wins the first couple, maybe even 3 primaries, ends up not being the nominee of that particular party.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of examples of that. And I think some of that might be the quirkiness of New Hampshire or some of those states. But I think another part of it is a little bit of voter remorse. They maybe pull the trigger for somebody early in the primary season, and then they start to assess, as they see that person go to debates or speak,
right,
they start to maybe question whether, gee whiz, I made an emotional, knee-jerk kind of vote because I just, didn't like this about one of the other candidates, or I like this one because of how neat they look, or some other personal reason. And then they start to think about it and go, oh, gee whiz. I'm trying to think, didn't Ben Carson, or I'm trying to think when Trump ran, and then you go back to some of the Democratic primaries, and early on, maybe Biden won, or somebody, and then Obama ended up being the nominee. So I don't know. I think there is value in having it be a nomination season as opposed to one day. I would flip the narrative a little bit and say to me there's a more compelling argument that our actual election day in November ought to be a day, not a season. We should all be voting on the basis of the same information, rather than somebody voting 40 or 50 days ahead of the rest of them.
Well, it's the same argument.
Yeah.
It's just blown up into the presidential debate. I mean, I drove by, I was on Morse Road, and there's the early voting place on Morse Road here in Columbus, Ohio. And it was packed. I mean, people were coming in and out, and a big sign said early voting here. And I'm like, well, they're all voting.
All right. Right. Yeah.
Right.
No, how do you handle the military piece of that then if you put it all on one day?
Well, like we used to, that's an exception. Military service.
Okay.
Yeah, it used to be that absentee voting was the exception, not the rule. And now it's sort of the opposite.
Just wanted in regards to what your clarity of is. Okay. Yeah. No.
And the opportunities for voter fraud with absentee ballots, I mean, it's been documented. We saw the documentary and the evidence about geolocating the harvesters' phones and what they were doing.
Yeah. Well, even beyond that, even more subtle than that, I think, is the point you're trying to make, Norm, which is it incentivizes the other side of the election against each other to drop little media stories, true or not, that can influence early voting. And then if those are later exposed to be nonsense, or if something else comes out, or if something changes in the world, or let's say Biden dies, which doesn't seem to be a completely out of the realm of possibility.
No matter what age, you're right. You early vote 50, 40 days out, and who you voted for dies in a car accident. Or airplane, whatever. All of a sudden, maybe withdraws because of health. Maybe. You're right. There are a lot. And again, it can happen if you voted on election day and before they're sworn in.
It's just
January. Not as likely. But we've had that. I guess you voted for someone, and they we've had an Ohio president passed away within 2 weeks because he was out in what president was it died a month in? What's his name?
Yeah,
William Henry Harrison.
Yeah,
Harrison.
so because he stuck out in the cold too long. It's stupid. Yeah, exactly.
Tippy Canoe and Tyler too.
Yeah.
I don't know. They say he got pneumonia.
Right. From
they say his inauguration speech was one of the longest in presidential history, and that he may have contracted pneumonia on inauguration day and died a couple of weeks later.
Yeah, exactly.
But probably didn't have penicillin.
Probably not, or figured it out. But yeah, exactly. So I don't know. It was brought up to me. I think my wife brought it up and such. That's a really good question. I don't know. I don't even know the history of primaries of why we don't on one day. Obviously it seems to work, but at the same time, this cycle felt just kind of neutering. That's all. Yeah. It just did. So I don't know if it's just something to discuss around the dinner table after you hear this podcast. Yeah,
fair enough. All right, Norm, what's next on the old hit parade?
Well, fitting in with that, talking about voter fraud, there was a survey by Harris or one of the major survey companies, not a politically driven, so this wasn't from some kind of advocacy group or anything, but 40% of voters admitted to making some sort of intentional or some sort of a lapse in their absentee voting, like filling out their spouse's ballot, filling out their kids away at college ballots, filling out a ballot for a parent or somebody that they're nursing, getting multiple ballots in different, like snowbirds that have homes in Florida and Ohio. And 40% of the people, when they were surveyed in detail about, well, did you do this? Did you do that? Whatever. The people that knew what the voting laws would consider to be illegal versus legal, 40% did something wrong. And that's not in-person voting. That is,
so did they ask, were they aware that it was actually fraud by doing that action? Or did they
sometimes people sometimes people just thought that, oh, well, I fill out stuff for my husband.
Okay.
All the time. So
it's unbeknownst that they're actually committing fraud then too. I mean, I'm not saying, they're just thinking they're doing a favor, right. but it's against the law.
Right. Or
you can't do this. Yeah.
I have represented folks who voted in 2 different counties, and look, the excuse is usually the same. Well, they sent me ballots, so I just figured it was okay. But they know it's not okay. Yeah. They know everybody knows you can't vote twice.
Right. That's pretty obvious, you'd think.
And if your husband's dead, you can't send in his vote. And if your wife is dead, you can't send in her vote.
Well, if you
can't do that stuff.
If you put it to the analogy that when you vote, you put your finger in a paint of green, that's the one you get. Right. You can't do it again.
You don't get to do it again. Right.
You don't do it again. So you can't fill out your husband's. You can't fill out your sons or daughters. You get the finger in the paint one time.
Right. And instead, people are just, and so everybody knows it's wrong, but they just figure, oh, it's not that big a deal, or I won't get caught, is really what they're saying. Yeah. How are they ever going to know? And it's true. When there's absentee voting, that kind of crap is a lot easier.
Yeah.
It's a lot easier. Now there was the last election, I had moved in between my registrations. So, and I wasn't sure, I don't remember how it all worked out. If I ended up having to vote provisionally, but I went to my old place and I was on that list, and I went to the new place and I voted provisionally at the new place. So I didn't vote at my old place. I started to, and I was like, I even asked the person, I told whoever was working, now look, here's what's going on. Should I vote here? Should I go to the other one and vote provisionally? And they didn't know. They didn't know what I should do. All right, well, I don't know. I looked it up. I went out to the parking lot, pulled out my phone, did some research. And I was like, all right, I can't vote here. I have to go vote in my new place and vote provisionally. And that's what I ended up doing. But so like that was an in-person snafu. But it dawned on me, I texted our good friend at the time, I could have voted in both places and nobody would have known. It didn't feel like it anyway.
Yeah.
I could have gone right in there and voted and gone right to the other place instead of voting provisionally. Maybe my provisional never gets counted. Or maybe, who knows, but like I could have easily done that. And I have no idea. I can't say it wouldn't have been smoked out in the counting, but it wouldn't have surprised me if it weren't.
And I think all three of us would be in the same boat. We would have a guilty conscience by doing it.
I couldn't do it. I started, I was like, I couldn't.
Even inadvertently, I know all three of us would kind of go, damn it. Why did I do that?
Yep.
I should not have done, even if you were advised to do it.
Yep.
I'm like you guys. I couldn't.
No.
I mean, you got to look at yourself in the mirror, and I can't.
But here's the danger. Here's the danger. We have to ask then. I'm going to open this up to a more philosophical question. Everybody knows this, right? Everybody, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to ask, when is it that people are willing to do it anyway? When is it?
Yeah.
And what motivates people to do it is when they feel they are so ideologically correct that the ends justify the means. And this has been the basis of the most horrific, awful affairs or awful events in human affairs. It's like the revolution in Russia is worth it. So we can kill all these people because it's worth the ultimate end game. So like people will stop at nothing. They don't care about the rules. They don't care about the practice. Even Kamala Harris said in a debate talking about primaries in the last election, there was some discussion about gun control, and I think Biden was the one who said, "Look, we can't do that." And she's like, "Yes, we can." I say,
Yeah.
"Yes, I'm going to do it anyway." And
Do it
Biden is
anyway.
told as a president, "Look, you can't do this. You can't forgive these loans. The U.S. Supreme Court says you can't do it." He's doing it anyway. So, like, when you get to the point where you feel like your cause is more important than the process that's in place that's worked, now we have trouble. And I think we have that in our country, maybe on both sides, but I think we are at that point in this country where particularly people on the left are willing to do this. They don't care. Whatever the means to get rid of Trump, we will do it, and we don't care. And
I'll give a good example, Steve, of where it has become, in some places, it's become official policy. Like, it went from being something you would do in private to sway an election to now it's just like it's wholesale viewed as legitimate. A good example is the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. I call them stupid advisors, but the San Francisco Board of Supervisors appointed a non-citizen. So and that was the point. They wanted a non-citizen to be on their board of election, like the regulatory board for San Francisco's elections. They have a Kelly Wong, Chinese American, but not American citizen, but a ethnic Chinese person named Kelly Wong was appointed by the Board of Supervisors to the elections board in San Francisco. Now, I mean, on its face, that's crazy. I mean, the people voting have to be citizens, and yet they have a non-citizen overseeing the process.
Well, this shows you also. This will sort of take us back into immigration, because recently, I forget where it came up and what bill it came up, but one of the provisions regarding either budget or something or other, Norm, you'll remember. I apologize to everybody because I should have thought about this and prepared it. But it was basically this: are we going to count illegal immigrants for purposes of congressional districting, and should we or should we not? And when it was put on paper, it divided the lines pretty evenly, left and right. Those on the left are saying yes, and those on the right are saying no way. So the idea would be you can weight your congressional district in your favor by letting illegal immigrants into the country and parking them in different places around. And it's that kind of dirty, sinister stuff that is what we're talking about. Like, if your quest for power is more important because you believe your cause is so just to save the world, to save the planet, to save humanity, and whatever it is that you're willing to do, whatever you have to do to maintain power, it's like that's the time you should look in the mirror and say, should I really be the one that has power?
Yeah, electoral districts are based on the once every 10-year census.
Yep.
And
that's right. Should we count the illegal immigrants as part of the census to calculate electoral district? The answer is no.
And the answer is they do under current.
It should be no.
Practice.
Right.
Yeah, they do count them
because look at the incentive structure there. Why don't we just let in a bunch of illegal immigrants and park them in places where we want to have control and power?
Right.
Well, and the estimate is in the 3 years under the Biden administration, as many as 12 million is the rough estimate people give. 8 million over the southern border, another couple of million under various programs like the one we talked about last week where they fly people in, and other kinds of programs, and then another 2 million people that just overstay their visas. They just stay here.
So there is a motive behind all this, that, or at least an apparent motive, that again, the ends justify the means to them. They don't care.
Yeah.
So, Steve, you're a bit of an economist by personal study, and your interests have we've had many talks about the economy and budgets and things like that. I heard this stat the other day that just rocked my world, that we are adding. So we're at about $34 trillion in debt as a country. We are adding $1 trillion every 100 days now. So we'll be at 38 trillion. We'll be at 38 trillion by the end of the year is the estimate.
There's going to be a reckoning sooner or later. There has to be a reckoning sooner or later. You just can't do this forever. And and now that's the bad news. The good news is you can turn it around almost immediately. It's not. It's like it's not that hard. The dollars that's at play in our country are so vast that you could just tweak a handful of things and turn it all around. But it's not going to happen. We don't ever back off on spending. We only increase spending. And now, I mean, everybody knows what the monster in the closet is Social Security that's coming and coming right quick. And if all you have to do is play it out and realize it's bankrupt already. It's a Ponzi scheme as it stands. So what's the plan other than we just keep doing what we're doing and sticking our head in the sand? No politician, Trump included, is willing to actually come forward and say enough's enough. Like when Trump, this is what I never understood so much about Trump is like his policies and his actions. Lots of them I agree with. Some of them I don't. And he was a big spender. He had no problem spending money, and he has no problem not touching Social Security or even talking about any sort of reform for it. So where does it end? I don't know where it ends. I mean, I think we're on a crash course with reality, and whenever it hits, whoever's in charge is going to have to deal with it.
My understanding is that the U.S. bonds have been downgraded just a little bit in recent years. And that has resulted in other countries like the Saudis, the Chinese, they're not buying our bonds as much as they used to. And what I'm hearing is, and maybe you can reinforce this if you're hearing the same and reading the same, is that the Fed is printing the 1 trillion every 100 days. They're essentially printing this, and then they're buying their own notes. So the person creating the money, the entity creating the money, is also the entity issuing, like buying up the promissory note for the very money that they are issuing. So
talk about a Ponzi scheme. That's like
yeah. Well, when you start to when you start to downgrade the bond,
right pocket to left pocket of the same pair of pants.
Yeah, and when you start to downgrade the bonds, or not that we do it, but it happens. Guess where the investment goes? Then they start buying land.
Yeah,
they start buying property.
Well, this BRIC group of foreign nations that want to replace the American dollar as the reference currency is apparently gaining some strength. I guess Brazil, Russia, a bunch of them want to get rid of the U.S. dollar as the benchmark. And
can you imagine the illegal trades around the world would throw a fit? I mean, the C note, the old C note before the strip in and such, that's the currency that they live off of that.
Yeah.
You'd have such an uproar from just the the underbelly of the world.
In the current regime, we have destroyed the value of the dollar, destroyed our economic power in the world. And what's his answer? Print more freaking money and give it away. And he's doing it in every way he can. Not to, like, student loans is a perfect example. You're taking it. It's like it's a form of taking money, or it's a form of printing money. Like you're forgiving debt. Like somehow that's different than printing money. It's lunacy.
Yeah,
it's lunacy.
Yeah.
And look, inflation is made. This is like the old what's his name? The old economist, not Thomas Sowell. Milton Friedman.
You mean
the old Milton Friedman. He goes, inflation is made in only one place, and that's Washington, D.C. That's it. It's the only place inflation is made. They print the money. And when they start printing money and giving away, that creates inflation. I mean, it's very simple.
Yeah. What triggered this was a little item I saw in the news this week where Morgan Stanley has warned about the potential crash of the U.S. dollar. And they said it will be the effect on us, because it all sounds very theoretical. People are like, well, if a dollar is worth half of what it used to be, I'll still, go to the dollar store and Kroger. I'll be fine. They said it will be like we lost a world war. It'll be that dramatic of an effect on us. And if you know your history, the depression that England went into immediately following World War II, even though they won the war, right? They almost had a socialist government for the next like 10 years after World War II, because the people basically could not afford to buy anything. They couldn't buy a home, they couldn't buy a car, they couldn't buy food, just hyperinflationary, because they had spent all this money to win World War II.
Hell, we're almost there. You can't afford to buy a home right now.
That's right.
You know, geez, I'm criminy, you know, to a certain degree. Yeah. Oh my God.
Well, I mean, this is, and it's all related, right? So what's happened? Because of this loosey-goosey printing money, we have inflation. And because of inflation, the interest rate, or they have to keep rising or raising the interest rates. And because interest rates are so high, people sitting on houses can't sell them because they can't go buy another house. They're not marketable. So now the market is freezing up and there's supply and demand problems. So it's going to drive the price of housing up. This is really basic economic stuff. And then you couple that with like land regulations on what people are allowed to build, where they're allowed to build, and preserving this, that, and the other. It's like you have basically created a commodity, a very tight commodity of housing. And you know, what's their solution? To offer huge dollars to backfill people into the cities and stack them up on high rises. Well, we're Americans. We don't want to live like that. You know, it's not what we want. So it's a mess. And it sooner or later, the chickens come home, right? The chickens are coming home to roost sooner or later. And, you know, it's unfortunately probably our kids that are really going to feel the brunt of it.
And I guess it would be true, right, guys? As our debt gets larger, this 1 trillion every 100 days will go to 1 trillion every 90, then 75 days. Like, it's
compounding interest in the wrong direction. Anybody who's ever been in credit card debt knows how this works.
Yeah. So like they got to do, we have to do something, or we're toast.
And in Washington, they've got their blinders on. Nobody says anything about it. They just keep on trudging along.
Because the decisions
will not do the hard.
They don't want to lose their vote.
They don't want to lose the vote.
They don't want to lose the vote.
Right, right. That's it. They don't want to upset a constituency that's suckling off of one of the multiple federal teats. You know?
Yeah.
And so the idea of economizing, what was it? Herman Cain said, if we just allowed the budget to grow at 1%, we could handle these long-term problems. But they won't even consider like holding it back. Like,
well, and it's not about cutting; just don't grow as much,
right? And
just
anybody
don't grow.
Yeah, and if you're talking about Social Security, go back to that a little bit. I mean, anybody that even throws out a suggestion gets twisted. So, and again, Nikki Haley suggested something about,
they get fried. You're right.
You're not going to be able to take money out until you're much older. Well, that gets twisted around.
Did you see the stats
It's like,
on
what
this?
the hell? It's a suggestion that it's obvious that's going to have to happen. Why is it weaponized?
When FDR created it, I heard, I don't know what somebody's show I was listening to. And when FDR created it, like the life expectancy was something like 60. And the age was 65
exactly.
And now people are retiring at, when can you take? At 61? I think you're early. At 62, you can take.
By the time we get to it, it's going to be like 67, 68.
Right. Well, it should be like 70.
It should be 70.
And it's like, it's 62 you can take. But your life expectancy is like 79.
Right.
I mean, so what we're doing is, and who's taking it? I mean, literally, who's taking it? It's the white collar folks who have retired, and it's like, well, I might as well take it, whatever. Yeah. It's like the hardworking folks need to keep working. It's not enough.
Yeah.
So it's a debacle of a system. Yeah. And you're right, Brett. Nobody on either side will touch that with a 10-foot
and
pole.
Anybody that suggests anything, it gets weaponized against them, even if it's a logical answer.
I remember in the 80s or in the 90s when I was planning my future, I looked at my buddies and said, we can count on nothing. Any retirement that I ever get is on me.
Yeah.
So I started my accounts. Right. I started investing early. And even if I only made 100, I put $10 in an account. And because I remember having this discussion with somebody, and it freaked me out back then. It's like, there's nothing there for us. It's like, who's giving us anything?
Right.
And instead what's happening, and I think at the same time, what's happening also is we don't have as many workers. So who's contributing into it?
That's the factor. Yeah. It's now a 2-to-1 putting in.
Yeah, I heard 2-1.
I think,
yes,
yeah,
I think
yeah.
that's accurate.
We're just 15 years ago, it was 5-1.
They knew this in the 80s. I remember this discussion back in the 80s talking about how the workforce is going to go down, and it's going to come down to a 2-1, and that it's not sufficient.
The boomers are living forever. You know,
right.
it's like
it's
all
not
this.
sufficient. It's not sufficient.
Yeah, you're 100% right, Brett.
Yeah.
I heard the same thing. We're on the same page.
Yeah.
Unbelievable.
One more local story that I have that's kind of interesting. Ohio is what's called a right to work state, which means that in theory, although it sometimes can be a bit of a contest with your union steward, but in theory, you cannot be forced to pay dues to a union.
Right.
So there is a teacher, Denise Kogar from Perry Local Schools. She was a member, I think she is still a teacher, but she has been a member of OPSE, the Ohio Association of Public School Employees, which is a union, public sector union. So she's a public school teacher. She has been a member of that union for 20 years. And I guess about 6-7 years ago, she decided to exercise her right under the right to work law to not pay dues anymore. I don't know why. I don't know the reasons. They could have been political. They could have been she just wanted to save the money. I don't know the reasons, and I don't think it matters. But she exercised that option, and it was not recognized in the school district, and the union kept deducting dues for the last 6-7 years. She has now been represented by something called the Liberty Justice Center out of Chicago, and that case is in court. So we'll see if she gets her money back.
Yeah, stand by. That's an interesting case. And I've always wondered, it's like saying in fraternity pledging in college, it's like, well, it's not required. It's voluntary. It's like completely ignoring all the pressure and leverage that is getting exercised against you to do things. It's
Right.
like, so I good for her. If nothing else, I just like somebody who wants to buck the system. Like you, I don't care the reason, but sometimes somebody just needs to say, you know what? I'm going to do this because I can.
Yeah.
Or not pay just because I can.
Right.
And that's just how it's going to be.
Yeah.
Well, look, we probably got to wrap it up. We got a little bit of a late start today, but we still got a good show in. Norm coming at us from Texas, where he's down there banging nails, I guess, doing some remodeling.
Hey, I was my first race up at Eagles Canyon. I'm racing in a week from now in an SCCA race, but a week ago I was racing in a vintage race with this old Mustang and got third place.
Wow.
Nice.
Yeehaw.
So
Nice.
out of all three in the race?
There were like, I don't know. There were like 16 cars in my group, but I got third in my class. So
gotcha. Well, congrats.
Nice.
Hey, on 6-year-old hardest rock tires. So for this coming race, which is much more ruthless, I got brand new tires this week for that one. So
all right. Well, Norm tearing up the tracks in Texas. So we are Common Sense Ohio, coming at you from commonsenseohioshow.com here at channel511.com Studio C. So look, what does all that mean? It means that you too could have a podcast. You could come right down here, sit at the round table, get your buddies on Zoom, get your guests on Zoom, and it'll be professionally produced. You will leave with something close to perfect. I never say perfect because nothing is perfect. But at any rate, you will have a phenomenal recording. You'll have audio, you'll have video, you'll have whatever you need. If you need extra services after that, you'll get that too. So how does that happen? Well, you just go to channel511.com. We have an app right there. You just log in, click off your time, reserve it on the calendar. One of our producers will be here to meet you and make sure you have everything you need to get your podcast professionally polished up the way you have always wanted it. So we are Common Sense Ohio, brought to you by Harper Plus Accounting, coming at you week in, week out, at least until now, right from the middle.